Getting through winter in the Middle Ages was incredibly hard, especially if I didn't have much money to my name. Back then, the medieval winter was considered to begin after St. Martin's Day on November 11th and lasted all the way until Candlemas on February 2nd. That meant facing months of worrying about whether I would have enough food to eat, enough fuel to stay warm, and a safe place to shelter, all without any of the modern comforts we take for granted today. As we settle into the cold, gloomy days of winter, I think it's the perfect time to step back into the Middle Ages and see how poor people managed to survive such a harsh season. Making it through those long months took careful planning, resourcefulness, and, more often than not, a healthy amount of luck. Before I dive into today's story, I want to take a moment to share a quick announcement. I've launched both a Patreon page and YouTube memberships to help support the channel. I'll keep this brief because I explain everything in much more detail in a free Patreon post called The Crusade Against the AI Pestilence. The short version is that it's becoming harder and harder for us to compete with the growing flood of AI-generated history videos appearing all over YouTube. At first, the impact was barely noticeable, but over the past year it has made a real difference. It's becoming increasingly difficult to support the real people behind this channel. The researchers, writers, editors, and everyone else who works hard to bring these videos to life. So, here's my offer. For the price of just 3 gold coins, or, in modern terms, about £3 a month, you'll receive an extra video every month. We're launching with 3 exclusive videos right away, including an extended discussion that builds on this episode by taking a much closer look at medieval farmers and the unique challenges they faced during winter. For those who are able and want to contribute a little more, there's also a higher membership tier. Members at that level will have their names permanently displayed at the end of our videos as a lasting thank you for supporting the channel. I also want to open the castle gates, so to speak, and invite you into the inner circle. Members will get regular behind-the-scenes updates as I work on new videos, learn about upcoming projects before anyone else, and even have the opportunity to help shape some of the ambitious ideas I have planned for the future. With enough support, I'll be able to keep producing the kinds of history videos you've come to expect. Looking further ahead, I'm also exploring some exciting possibilities, including continuing my Roman, Viking, and pirate history channels, creating on-location documentaries, appearing on camera instead of remaining just a voice behind the scenes, releasing original medieval-inspired musical compositions, and much more. If you're curious about those plans, I explain them in greater detail in the free post over on Patreon. The goal is to create a way to begin bringing those ideas to life while giving this amazing community a chance to be directly involved. I want you to help guide the future of the channel by sharing your thoughts, voting on ideas, and becoming part of the creative process. Over the past few years, I felt incredibly fortunate to have such a loyal and supportive audience that comes back week after week for every new episode. My hope is that this new direction will allow the channel to keep growing while exploring all kinds of exciting new projects together. If you're in a position to support the work and would like to help real people continue creating history content in the age of artificial intelligence, I'd be truly grateful to have you join us. And if supporting financially isn't possible, that's completely okay. You can still make a huge difference by liking the videos, leaving comments, and subscribing to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps more than you might realize. Thanks so much, everyone. I can't wait to chat with you over there. Winter has always had a reputation for being especially rough up north. Living in the north of England today, I'm lucky enough to have plenty of food, central heating, and all the comforts that make the cold months much easier to handle. I don't have to depend on whatever happens to be in season because I can simply run to the supermarket and buy fresh fruit and vegetables whenever I need them. And yes, for those of you down south, even when it's the middle of January and the temperature drops low enough for snow, we still have electric blankets, bright electric lights, and every modern convenience imaginable. I've even connected my electric blanket to a smart plug, so I can switch it on from my phone while I'm walking home after spending the evening at the local pub. By the time I get back, my bed is already warm and waiting for me. Even with all of those modern luxuries, though, there's one thing technology still hasn't managed to eliminate: the winter blues. Most of us know the feeling all too well. It's that heavy sense of gloom that settles in during the colder months, when I leave for work in the dark and often return home after sunset, facing the same cold, gray skies. Today, we call it seasonal affective disorder, but the emotional weight of winter is nothing new. People living in the Middle Ages experienced those same feelings, and in many ways they probably felt them even more deeply. One of the greatest surviving collections of medieval English writing is known as the Harley manuscript. It contains an incredible variety of material, ranging from political works and travel guides for pilgrims to humorous stories, collections of sayings, and beautiful songs. Just like modern music, some of those lyrics focused on love, while others reflected on everyday life and human emotions. One particular poem captures the sadness that winter seemed to bring. In translation, it says, "Winter awakens all my sorrow. Now the leaves have withered away. I often sigh and grieve whenever these thoughts enter my mind. I think about the joys of this world and how they all fade into nothing." If those words sound a little dramatic, they wouldn't feel out of place in the lyrics of a modern melancholy songwriter. The poem doesn't stop there either. It eventually turns its attention to death, reminding the reader that every life must come to an end. That gloomy outlook wasn't unusual during the Middle Ages. Winter had a way of reminding people just how fragile life really was. Death was a constant part of everyday existence, but the dangers increased dramatically once the cold weather arrived. A long, freezing, and rain-soaked winter was difficult for everyone, but it hit poor people especially hard. Since roughly 85% of the medieval population lived as peasants or in poverty, the overwhelming majority of people faced the season with very few resources. For them, simply surviving until spring was often a struggle that demanded endurance, careful preparation, and more than a little good fortune. When winter arrived, having the right clothes and enough fuel to stay warm could mean the difference between life and death. Most country families had to make their own clothing because buying ready-made garments simply wasn't an option. They spun wool from their sheep and wove it into thick, durable fabric that could stand up to the cold. Knitted sweaters like the ones we wear today didn't exist yet. Knitting wouldn't become common until much later, so people relied on heavy woven wool instead. Those thick clothes did a decent job of keeping the cold out, but they had one major drawback. Once they became wet, they took a very long time to dry. For many peasants, that was a serious problem because they owned only a single set of clothes. The same outfit was often worn day after day throughout the entire winter, with little or no opportunity to wash it. Oddly enough, the constant smoke from the open hearth inside the house helped a little. As people spent so much time around the fire, the smoke worked its way into the fibers of their clothing and acted as a natural deodorizer, masking at least some of the unpleasant smells. That was probably a blessing, considering that many farming families shared their homes with their animals during the coldest months of the year. Cows, sheep, goats, and other livestock were often brought inside because their body heat helped warm the house. Of course, living in close quarters with unwashed people, damp clothes, and farm animals didn't exactly create the freshest-smelling home. To make the air a little more pleasant, people often scattered fragrant herbs across the floor. The herbs released sweet aromas as they were walked on, helping to cover up some of the less appealing odors inside the house. Keeping the home insulated was just as important as wearing warm clothing. Families packed straw, reeds, and rushes into places where cold drafts could enter, and when night came, everyone wrapped themselves in as many blankets as they could gather. Underneath those rough woolen clothes, a peasant usually wore a simple linen shift. Unlike thick wool, linen was softer against the skin and could be washed much more frequently, making it far more comfortable for everyday wear. Wool had one important advantage: it could still keep a person warm even after becoming damp. Even so, Getting completely soaked by heavy rain was something everyone tried to avoid. Once the cold settled into the body, a simple chill could quickly develop into a serious respiratory illness. Without modern medicine to treat infections, illnesses that seem manageable today often became deadly. As winter tightened its grip, people simply added more layers. Woolen hats became essential, while women commonly wore caps, scarves, and heavy cloaks. A leather cloak offered valuable protection against rain and wet weather, and padded mittens helped shield hands from the bitter cold, much like winter gloves do today. Footwear, however, was another matter entirely. Good shoes or boots were expensive, and many peasants couldn't afford proper footwear at all. Those who were fortunate enough to own a pair usually wore sturdy leather boots whenever possible. Layering clothing served another practical purpose. Hard, physical labor generated plenty of heat, so workers could remove a layer while they were sweating in the fields or forests and put it back on once they cooled down, helping them avoid becoming chilled afterward. Of course, warm clothing alone wasn't enough. Every household also needed a steady supply of firewood. Many tenants considered themselves fortunate if their lord allowed them to gather fallen branches and twigs from nearby woodlands. That permission wasn't always guaranteed, and it could make an enormous difference during the long winter months. In fact, forests close to villages were often picked almost completely clean, because families collected every stick they could find to fuel their fires. Dead wood became so scarce that there was often very little left lying on the forest floor. On larger manorial estates where timber was more plentiful, the lord usually claimed the extra wood for himself. Workers gathered it into cartloads, and it was then sold at local markets for profit rather than simply given away. There were even times when so much fallen timber accumulated that it blocked travel through parts of the forest. Records from the Forest of Leicester describe one such occasion, when the excess dead wood became so abundant that it had to be cleared away. Rather than letting it go to waste, the wood was collected and sold for a penny per half a dozen cartloads. As it turns out, even something beneficial could become a problem if there was too much of it. One of the most respected medieval texts was the Secretum Secretorum, or the Secret Book of Secrets. Originally written in Arabic during the 10th century and later translated into Latin in the middle of the 12th century, it became highly influential throughout the High Middle Ages. The book offered advice on everything from medicine and health to nature and daily life, including its thoughts on the hardships of winter. Its description of the season paints a bleak picture. It explains that cold dominates everything. The winds become sharp and biting. The trees stand bare after losing all their leaves, and the green life of the countryside seems to die away, becoming as hard as stone. It goes on to describe wild animals retreating into caves and sheltered places to escape the freezing temperatures and relentless dampness. According to the text, the skies grow dark, the days become gloomy, and every living creature shivers as winter slowly drains away its strength. The gloomy comparisons don't stop there. The author even likens winter to an elderly woman worn down by age, stripped bare, and standing on the very edge of death. It's certainly not the most cheerful way to describe the season, but it reflects just how harsh winter felt to people living during the Middle Ages. The book also claimed that humans suffered from the cold just as much as animals did. Medieval medicine was based on the theory of the four bodily humors, and during winter it was believed that phlegm became the dominant humor within the body. Because of that belief, people were advised to eat hot, rich, and fatty foods to help maintain their strength. Bloodletting, a treatment commonly practiced throughout the medieval period, was considered a bad idea during the cold months because it was thought to weaken the body even further. The text also offered one piece of advice that some people probably weren't thrilled to hear. According to its authors, excessive sexual activity should be avoided during winter because it was believed to drain the body's vital energy at a time when strength needed to be conserved. No matter whether someone was rich or poor, everyone felt the effects of the changing seasons. Medieval society depended almost entirely on agriculture, so the success or failure of the harvest affected every level of society. Even a king had reason to worry about whether the coming year would bring a plentiful harvest or widespread famine. The difference, of course, was that while a poor family might face starvation or freeze to death after a failed harvest, the wealthy were far less likely to suffer those same life-threatening consequences. Interestingly, the Secretum Secretorum also suggested that eating a little more than usual during the coldest part of the year wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The authors believed that winter caused the body's natural heat to concentrate inward, making digestion stronger and more efficient than during the warmer seasons. If there was ever a time to enjoy a hearty feast without feeling too guilty, medieval scholars would probably have pointed to the Christmas season, when filling your stomach was thought to be perfectly suited to the coldest days of the year. Surviving the winter often came down to little more than careful planning and a bit of luck. Keeping livestock alive through the cold months was expensive because every animal needed precious hay and stored feed. As a result, many families, though certainly not all of them, chose to slaughter or sell some of their animals around Martinmas. Usually, the oldest and weakest animals were the first to go, while the healthiest were kept alive in the hope that they would make it through to spring. Everything depended on how successful the hay harvest had been. If there was plenty of hay, more animals could survive the winter. That was a worthwhile investment because a living animal offered far more than just meat. Cows, sheep, and goats provided fresh milk every day, which could be turned into butter and cheese. Sheep and goats also produced wool, one of the most valuable materials in medieval life, making them far more useful alive than dead. The same thinking applied to poultry. Older chickens, geese, and ducks eventually ended up in the cooking pot after they stopped laying eggs, but as long as they continued producing eggs, they were much more valuable alive. A steady supply of eggs provided far more nourishment over time than 1 or 2 meals from the bird itself. Life became even more dangerous when disasters struck. A war, a failed harvest, or some other natural catastrophe could push an already struggling family over the edge. Even in years without those extra hardships, winter remained an incredibly difficult season for poor people. The hardships faced by ordinary peasants were captured by the 14th-century poet William Langland in Piers Plowman. He describes poor families living in tiny cottages, struggling to raise children while paying rent to their landlords. Whatever little money they earned from spinning cloth disappeared on housing, milk, and meal for making porridge. Even then, it still wasn't enough. Their children cried from hunger, and the parents endured constant hardship and suffering alongside them. Preparing enough food before winter arrived was absolutely essential. The work began in autumn, and preserving food for the months ahead demanded an enormous amount of time and effort. Meat from slaughtered cattle, sheep, and pigs was first soaked in heavily salted water for several days. After that, the cuts were hung in a smoky place, often above the household fire, where they slowly dried and absorbed the preserving smoke. Months later, when it was finally time to eat that preserved meat, it had to be boiled for a long time to remove much of the salt and soften the tough flesh. Once it was ready, it usually found its way into a large pot of pottage along with whatever ingredients happened to be available. Herbs, onions, peas, lentils, leeks, beans, and almost any edible vegetable could be added to the pot. If it was edible, chances were it ended up in the stew. Pottage formed the foundation of the medieval peasant diet. It simmered constantly in a large pot suspended over the fire, with fresh ingredients being added whenever they became available. It was simple food, but it kept families alive. Butter and cheese also had to survive for months without spoiling, so both were heavily salted before being stored for winter use. Among all the farm animals, pigs were especially valuable. They supplied a wide range of different cuts of meat that could be salted, smoked, and preserved for long-term storage. Beyond that, pigs also provided lard and tallow, both of which were essential for making candles that lit homes through the long, dark evenings of winter. During autumn, families also gathered whatever nature had to offer. Nuts, berries, rose hips, apples, and plums were collected whenever possible, and many of them were preserved by pickling or other methods so they could be eaten long after the growing season had ended. Although there wasn't nearly as much outdoor work once winter settled in, life certainly didn't become idle. There was always something that needed doing inside the house. Women spent countless hours sewing, repairing clothes, spinning wool, and weaving cloth. The rest of the household kept busy making baskets, carving wooden tools and utensils, repairing leather goods, and tackling all the other jobs that had been put off during the busy farming season. Because so much daily life revolved around indoor work, maintaining a fire throughout the winter was absolutely essential. The hearth did far more than simply warm the house. It provided light for evening work, a place to cook every meal, and the heart of the home where the family gathered during the coldest months of the year. After hearing all of that, you might be wondering whether winter in the Middle Ages had any bright side at all. Surely, it couldn't have been nothing but misery from beginning to end. As difficult as the season was, there were still moments that gave people something to look forward to. The lords who controlled the manors understood that keeping their workers' spirits up was more than just an act of kindness. It was also good practical sense. After all, a peasant who had died from hunger or exposure during the winter wouldn't be around to plow the fields once spring arrived. That helps explain why, right in the middle of the coldest and darkest part of the year, everyday life was interrupted by the great celebration of Christmas. It gave people a welcome break from the endless routine of hard work, short days, and freezing weather. The medieval church strongly encouraged both the rich and the poor to celebrate the holiday together. Christmas was meant to be a season of generosity, when those with plenty shared what they had with people who were less fortunate. The English farmer and poet Thomas Tusser captured that spirit perfectly when he wrote, "What season better of the whole year? Thy needy, poor neighbor to comfort and cheer." Because of that tradition, it became common for many lords to host a Christmas feast for the peasants who worked their land. One surviving record from a manor belonging to Glastonbury Abbey describes exactly what the workers received. Each peasant, along with his wife, was entitled to enjoy Christmas dinner in the Lord's Hall. The meal included 2 loaves of bread, 2 dishes of meat, and as much ale as they needed, all served according to the record, clearly and honorably. That sounds wonderfully generous at first, but there was a catch. The same record goes on to explain that every worker had to bring a dish, a drinking cup, and even a tablecloth from home. On top of that, each family was expected to provide a bundle of firewood before Christmas to help cook the meal. If they failed to bring the wood, the rules were simple. Their food would be served uncooked. So much for goodwill toward everyone. That gives us a fascinating glimpse into what winter was really like for ordinary people during the Middle Ages. It was a season filled with hardship, uncertainty, and constant work. Survival depended on careful preparation, strong communities, and a little bit of luck. Yet, despite all those struggles, people still found reasons to gather, celebrate, and look forward to brighter days when spring finally returned. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. As I mentioned earlier, I'm genuinely excited about where this channel can go with the support of Patreon and YouTube memberships. If you enjoy these videos and you're in a position to help, I'd be grateful to have you along for the journey as we continue creating even more history content together. If supporting the channel financially isn't possible, I completely understand. You can still make a huge difference simply by leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, or sharing the videos with others. Every bit of support helps more than you might realize. Thanks again for watching, and I truly appreciate every one of you. I'll be back next Friday with another story from history. Until then, take care, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you in the next video.